Welcome to the Crown Recap. In 1947, Prince Philip of Denmark and Greece renounces his royal titles to be able to marry Princess Elizabeth. With his new title, he rises through the ranks of the Royal Navy, giving birth to two children, Charles and Anne. However, Elizabeth's father, King George VI, begins to succumb to his illness. Members of the Parliament increasingly voice their disdain for Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Therefore, Deputy Prime Minister Anthony Eden pleads for George to convince Churchill to step down, but he refuses, and not so long after, he dies in his sleep. Elizabeth assumes the role of the new monarch. A smog brushes over London, killing thousands of citizens. In the midst of this, Churchill's assistant is killed by a bus driver. This death is the catalyst for Churchill to create the Clean Air Act, preventing all future smogs. This action impresses Elizabeth, and she allows him to stay in office. King George's brother, Edward VIII, returns home after his 20-year hiatus. He was previously named to be king, but abdicated the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. His mother, Queen Mary, resents him for this. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's younger sister, Princess Margaret, begins an affair with a divorced royal air enforcer, Peter Townsend. The Church of England forbids divorcees to get remarried, so the only way they can get married is with Elizabeth's blessing. But Edward advises against this because of his experience marrying a divorcee, and they are unable to get married. Nonetheless, Elizabeth's relationship is derailing, with them having public arguments, leading to Philip spending more time away, and Elizabeth growing closer to their horse racing manager Porchy, which only drives more of a wedge between their relationship. Churchill ends up resigning, and Anthony succeeds him as Prime Minister. Elizabeth starts to believe that Philip is having an affair after she finds a picture of a Russian ballerina in his briefcase, leading them to another argument, where Philip hates his son Charles for outranking him, and the palace staff for not treating him with respect. To absolve this issue, Elizabeth names him the Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. They rekindle their relationship and give birth to another child, Prince Andrew. Prime Minister Eden is forced to resign after his failed attempt at stopping the Suez crisis. Princess Margaret is still lonesome since the breakup with Peter, when she meets photographer Tony Jones, who takes photos of her nude in a photo shoot and publishes them to a newspaper, shocking Elizabeth and the public. When she finds out that Peter remarried a younger woman, she pressures Tony into proposing, so Tony and Margaret get married. They are entangled in another scandal when historians find out about the Marburg files, entailing Edward's past association with Adolf Hitler, with them personally being invited to Germany by Hitler. This revelation forces Elizabeth to banish Edward from the royal family. A massive sex scandal emerges, facilitated in sex parties held by Stephen Ward, who was put on trial, but before his conviction he ended his own life. Photos of these parties spread throughout England, with Prince Philip being inside them, but he denies the allegation, and Elizabeth coddles him, reconciling their relationship, creating the new Prince Edward. The death of Churchill rings throughout England, and so forth comes a new age with Harold Wilson as the new Prime Minister. Rumours spread of his involvement as a KGB mole, but the real mole was Elizabeth's advisor, Anthony Blunt, but he possesses more evidence on Philip's involvement in the sex scandal, so they choose to reclose the fact that Blunt is a traitor. The cabinet publicly admonishes the royal family's spending, whereby Philip complains about the tightening of their budget on live television, arrogantly professing that he had to sell one of his many yachts. Philip's uncle, Louis, or Lord Mountbatten, who tries to start a coup and replace Wilson as Prime Minister, but Elizabeth stops him in his tracks. He grows close to Elizabeth's son Charles, who has started developing feelings for Camilla Shand, and knows his family would disapprove of them getting married. He asks Louis for help. However, Louis conspires with Elizabeth to marry off Camilla, forcing Prince Charles to serve in the Caribbean for 8 months. Princess Margaret's marriage derails after her affair is revealed. They get divorced, one of the many few in the royal family history. Struggling with this and the ridicule faced by the public, she tries to commit suicide, but luckily she survives, and the sisters reminisce all their fond memories together. And so forth does England, celebrating Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee, marking her 25th anniversary of her serving as Queen of the United Kingdom. Several years have passed, and Margaret Thatcher is elected as the new Prime Minister, as well as the country's first woman to become one. Thatcher and Elizabeth coincide with different ideals, and a shift against Thatcher begins. Elizabeth sanctions a support for the adherents to ending the apartheid in Africa. Behind closed doors, Thatcher refuses to sign for this, fearing that it could immensely destroy the British economy. She ends up signing, but it is too late. Elizabeth leaks the quarrel between them when Geoffrey Howe resigns as Prime Minister. He gives a compelling speech attacking Thatcher's ideologies, destroying the country, and idiotic policies, leading the board to turn against her, and Elizabeth convinces her to end on a good note, to resign from Parliament. When Prince Edward turns 21, he is awarded the title Councillor of State. In doing so, he takes Princess Margaret's role, throwing her into a turmoil, so she seeks out guidance from a therapist, revealing that her two deceased cousins was Nerissa and Catherine. They were both institutionalized and hidden from the public because of their disorders. When Lord Mountbatten is assassinated, Charles finds a letter from him, advising him to seek out a suitable wife for the royal family, and thus Lady Diana Spencer is introduced. The family accepts her, pressuring him to propose, which he does so, but secretly he is still involved with Camilla. Soon after getting engaged, Diana starts to exhibit features of an eating disorder, partially due to marrying someone she didn't know and the anxiety of being in the royal family. They slowly grow apart because they were married way too early in their relationship. They have two children, William and Harry, but Charles still has an inkling of love for Camilla. Further separating them is Charles' disdain for Diana's growing popularity in the public, leading Charles to want a divorce to spend more time with Camilla, but he is forbidden by Elizabeth. Diana is forced to remain in the marriage, with Philip subtly threatening her. With Charles and Diana's marriage looking disingenuous to the public, they decide to take a trip away, calling it the second honeymoon to appease the press. When it is all said and done, Diana feels trapped, stuck in the marriage because the English church disobeys it, and receiving flack from the rest of the royals. Whilst Charles runs around with his true love Camilla, she is forced to write a book about her inability to find happiness and uncover the reality of Diana's life. James Colthurst brings tape recordings of her answered questions to the writer, Arthur Morton. When it is released, Charles demands a divorce, but Elizabeth won't allow it, as he is the heir to the throne. Queen Elizabeth apologizes to the nation in the Annus Horribilis speech, whereby she admits all her wrongdoing, that of Margaret not being able to marry the true love of her life, Peter. Not long after, Elizabeth allows them to get divorced, and soon after, the Camilla Gate tapes are released. When Charles was still in his marriage, he was sweet-talking Camilla. Propagated by being published in the newspapers, it decimates his character, getting kicked out of a royal meeting for this. He decides to restore his image by getting an interview by the Honourable Jonathan Dimbleby to address his unfaithful allegations and his ideas for the modern changes required for a monarch. With William, her eldest son, leaving to be received by a prestigious boarding school, she is left alone when she is approached by Martin Bashir, a Pakistani journalist working for the BBC. As it closes in on Guy Fawkes Night, Diana gives the interview, replying to Prince Charles' allegations, and as precognitions, she warns the Queen of it. The change in Prime Minister John Major to Tony Blair has shifted the mindset to a new, forward-thinking litigation. As Britannia comes to be decommissioned, Prince Charles takes her on a trip to the handover to Hong Kong, and in doing so, takes a trip with Camilla. Seeking ways to escape Camilla's 50th birthday celebration across the country, Princess Diana becomes a guest of Muhammad Fayyid on their vacation abroad. This is where the series ends. For a similar series about humans solving abstract ideas, watch this.